When it comes to building tough, dependable cars at America's most affordable prices, Yugo leads the way. Others are trying to follow but can't match Yugo's reliability for the price. Now Yugo leads with a 4-year, 40,000-mile warranty. And for 1 year or 12,000 miles, all you pay for is the gas. That's peace of mind. That's confidence. That's Yugo. For your nearest dealer, call 1-800-USA-YUGO. Yugo, committed to building the toughest, most dependable cars a little money can buy.
The Yugo GV, the compact car that became a punchline. Welcome to The Car Professor, where we explore the legends, disasters, and everything in between in the world of automobiles. Today, we're diving into one of the most infamous vehicles ever sold in America, the Yugo GV. Billed as an affordable and practical import from Yugoslavia, the Yugo GV promised basic transportation at a rock-bottom price. What buyers got instead was a masterclass in poor engineering, shoddy build quality, and frustration that left many wondering if they'd been pranked. How did a car with such potential become the butt of every automotive joke? Let's examine 30 reasons why the Yugo GV earned its reputation as one of the worst cars in history. 1. Unreliable engine. The Yugo GV's 1.1L four-cylinder engine was a mechanical mess that made even its simplest functions feel like a gamble. Derived from a decades-old Fiat engine, it was designed for low-cost manufacturing rather than reliability. Owners often joked that starting the car was a 50-50 proposition. On a good day, it roared to life with all the enthusiasm of a sick lawnmower. On a bad day, you were left stranded in the driveway. One infamous issue was the engine's tendency to overheat due to poorly designed cooling systems. The radiator was undersized, and the water pump frequently failed, leading to countless cases of warped cylinder heads and blown head gaskets. In one memorable incident, from a 1987 Car and Driver long-term test, the engine blew up on a simple highway drive, forcing the writer to hitchhike home. Stories like these became so common that breaking down in a Yugo felt like a rite of passage. Mechanically, the engine was also plagued by weak timing belts, which required replacement every 30,000 miles. Failure to do so risked catastrophic damage. And let's not forget its appetite for oil, with many owners finding themselves topping up every week, much like feeding a bottomless pit. It was as if the engine wasn't just unreliable, it actively sought new ways to betray its owner. 2. Terrible build quality. Imagine a car assembled with all the precision of a toddler playing with Legos. That was the Yugo GV. Built in a factory in Kragujevac, Yugoslavia, where quality control was more of a suggestion than a standard, the car rolled off assembly lines with mismatched panels, poorly aligned doors, and trim pieces that often fell off before the vehicle reached its first oil change. One particularly infamous anecdote involves an owner who bought a brand new Yugo only to find that the passenger side door wouldn't open. Upon inspection, it turned out the latch mechanism had been installed upside down, a mistake so blatant it felt intentional. The dashboard was made of brittle, low-grade plastic that cracked if exposed to sunlight for too long. Interior switches and knobs often snapped off in your hand, leaving you with nothing but regret. The situation was so dire that dealerships in the US frequently spent hours reassembling parts of the car just to make them remotely functional. And yet, even after these fixes, the Yugo felt like it was being held together by hope and duct tape. Its build quality wasn't just bad, it was an art form. 3. Electrical failures. If you've ever wanted to experience life in a haunted house, owning a Yugo GV was a close second. The electrical system was a chaotic tangle of poorly routed wires and subpar components that seemed to have minds of their own. Headlights dimmed unpredictably, dashboard lights flickered like they were signaling ghosts, and the ignition system often refused to cooperate. One of the most common failures involved the alternator, which seemed incapable of keeping up with even the car's limited electrical demands. Owners reported batteries dying unexpectedly, leaving them stranded at the most inconvenient moments. Another frequent issue was with the fuse box, where loose connections caused everything from non-functional windshield wipers to inoperable tail lights. A memorable anecdote from a Yugo owner's forum detailed how their car's radio would spontaneously turn on and off, sometimes while the car was parked and locked. Mechanics often joked that diagnosing electrical problems in a Yugo was less about skill and more about psychic intuition. In the end, the Yugo's wiring wasn't just unreliable, it was actively out to confuse and frustrate its owner. The Yugo GV's 55 horsepower engine was laughably underpowered, even by 1980s standards. Accelerating to highway speeds felt like a Herculean effort. In fact, automotive journalists of the time often joked that the car needed a running start to merge into traffic safely. Its 0-60 mph time hovered around 14 seconds, assuming the engine cooperated, and its top speed was barely 86 mph, which felt more like a dare than a specification. One particularly infamous story involves a driver attempting to climb a modest hill, only for the Yugo to slow to a crawl despite the gas pedal being floored. The car's diminutive power output also made overtaking a high-stakes gamble. Drivers often described the sensation of trying to pass a truck as a near-death experience. Even its gear ratios betrayed the car, with the manual transmission poorly spaced, forcing the engine to scream at high RPMs just to maintain highway speeds. It wasn't just underpowered, it was a testament to how little performance a car could offer while still technically being able to move. 5. Outdated design. The Yugo GV wasn't just poorly built, it was also hopelessly outdated by the time it arrived in the US. Based on the Fiat 127, a car originally designed in the 1970s, the Yugo brought nothing new to the table except lower quality materials and worse assembly. While competitors like the Honda Civic and Toyota Corolla embraced modern engineering and design, the Yugo clung to its dated roots like a relic from a bygone era. One glaring example was its suspension. While other compact cars adopted independent rear suspensions for better handling and comfort, the Yugo stuck with a simple live axle and coil springs, resulting in a bumpy, uncomfortable ride. Its steering, too, felt ancient, with a vague, disconnected feel that made every turn an adventure. The interior design was equally archaic, with boxy, uninspired aesthetics and controls that seemed more suited to a 1960s Eastern block tractor than a 1980s passenger car. Even the exterior styling was bland and uninspiring, earning it the nickname, the refrigerator on wheels. The Yugo didn't just feel old, it felt forgotten by time. 6. Non-existent rust protection. The Yugo GV's approach to rust protection could be summarized in one word: non-existent. Built in Yugoslavia during a period of economic and industrial turmoil, the car's body panels were made of low-quality, untreated steel. Unlike competitors who used galvanization or advanced coatings to combat corrosion, the Yugo rolled off the assembly line as a bare metal victim, waiting for moisture to strike. This oversight made the car incredibly susceptible to rust, even in regions with mild climates. The problem wasn't just the lack of rust proofing. It was compounded by the car's poor assembly. Gaps between panels and improperly sealed joints allowed water to seep into areas like the wheel wells and undercarriage. In colder climates, where road salt was common, the Yugo often developed rust holes within months. Anecdotes from owners in places like the Midwest describe their cars looking like Swiss cheese by their second winter. Stories of floor pans rusting through completely were so common that they became part of the Yugo's legend. Even if an owner tried to protect their Yugo with aftermarket rust proofing, the car's design flaws made it a losing battle. Moisture trapped in crevices and seams ensured that rust kept spreading no matter how many layers of protective coating were applied. For many owners, the Yugo wasn't just a car. It was a daily reminder of how quickly metal can disintegrate when left to fend for itself. 7. Noisy ride. Driving a Yugo GV was less about transportation and more about enduring an auditory onslaught. With minimal soundproofing, every rattle, clatter, and hum from the car's poorly engineered components reverberated through the cabin. At idle, the engine emitted a rough mechanical growl that sounded more like industrial machinery than a compact car. Once in motion, the cacophony of road noise, wind, and mechanical vibrations made conversations inside nearly impossible. The suspension system added its own symphony of creaks and groans, particularly over uneven surfaces. Owners often reported hearing strange noises that mechanics struggled to diagnose, with loose bolts, misaligned parts, and poorly mounted components all contributing to the problem. One particularly vivid description from a Yugo owner likened the driving experience to being trapped inside a large coffee can being kicked down the street. Even routine trips in a Yugo felt like sensory overload. The windows would whistle in the wind due to poor sealing, and the thin body panels amplified external noise like a drum. Long drives were especially punishing, leaving drivers exhausted not just from the physical discomfort, but from the constant assault on their ears. The Yugo wasn't just noisy, it was a car that demanded earplugs as standard equipment. 8. Poor crash safety. The Yugo GV's crash safety was as flimsy as the rest of its design. Built with no meaningful structural reinforcements, the car crumpled like paper in collisions. Unlike competitors that prioritized safety features like crumple zones and reinforced door beams, the Yugo seemed to have been designed with cost saving as its only concern. The result was a car that offered about as much protection in an accident as a cardboard box. In crash tests conducted by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, the Yugo performed disastrously. Videos of frontal collisions showed the cabin collapsing under impact, with the steering wheel and dashboard pushed directly into the driver's space. Side impact tests fared no better, with the paper-thin doors failing to absorb any significant force. Anecdotal accounts of real-world accidents were equally grim, with many Yugo crashes resulting in severe injuries even at low speeds. The lack of basic safety features, like airbags or anti-lock brakes, only made matters worse. The Yugo's reputation for being unsafe wasn't just a perception, it was backed by hard evidence. For many buyers, the car's low price tag wasn't worth the risk of driving what amounted to a moving death trap. 9. Uncomfortable interior. The Yugo GV's interior was less a place to sit and more a place to suffer. The seats were thinly padded, made with cheap foam that compressed over time, offering no support for long drives. Covered in coarse, low-quality fabric, the seats often tore or wore out quickly, leaving drivers with exposed springs that turned discomfort into outright pain. Adjustments were minimal, with seat tracks prone to jamming, making it nearly impossible to find a comfortable driving position. The dashboard was another exercise in corner cutting. Made of brittle plastic, it was prone to cracking under sunlight or even mild pressure. The controls were clunky and often broke off in users' hands, while the steering wheel felt like holding a toy rather than a functional car part. A particularly infamous design flaw involved the placement of the gearshift, which sat awkwardly low and made shifting gears an ergonomic nightmare. Even basic features were missing or poorly implemented. Air vents barely moved any air, cup holders were non-existent, and storage compartments were laughably small. Every aspect of the Yugo's interior seemed to scream, "You get what you pay for." And what you paid for was essentially a glorified go-kart. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a test of endurance for anyone who dared sit inside. 10. Terrible fuel economy. For a car that weighed less than a ton and had a tiny 1.1L engine, the Yugo GV should have been a fuel-sipping marvel. Instead, its outdated carburetor and poorly tuned engine resulted in disappointing real-world fuel economy. While the car was officially rated at around 30 mpg, many owners reported figures closer to the low 20s, especially in city driving. This inefficiency was baffling for a car marketed as economical. Part of the problem lay in the carburetor's design, which delivered uneven fuel-air mixtures that often caused stalling and misfires. The engine's lack of precision meant it burned more fuel than necessary, particularly under load. Drivers frequently found themselves refueling more often than expected, erasing much of the savings they'd hoped for with a low-cost car. One humorous account described the Yugo as burning gas like it thought it was a V8. Compounding the issue was the car's need for constant maintenance. Leaking fuel lines, clogged filters, and poorly calibrated systems all contributed to its inefficiency. While competitors like the Honda Civic delivered exceptional mileage with similar-sized engines, the Yugo couldn't keep up. It was the kind of car that managed to make even its primary selling point, affordability, feel like a lie. (11) Constant maintenance issues. Owning a Yugo GV was like adopting a sickly pet. It demanded constant attention, and no matter how much effort you put in, something always went wrong. Basic components like alternators, radiators, and water pumps failed far more frequently than in other cars. Timing belts were another notorious weak point. If not replaced every 30,000 miles, they risked snapping and causing catastrophic engine damage. Many owners found themselves spending more on repairs within the first year than the car's original purchase price. One owner recounted a particularly painful experience of having to replace their clutch 3 times within 40,000 miles due to poor design and subpar materials. Mechanics often described working on a Yugo as an exercise in frustration, with poorly assembled components making even routine maintenance a chore. Stories of bolts being cross-threaded at the factory or parts being installed incorrectly were so common they became a running joke. Adding insult to injury was the difficulty of finding replacement parts. With a limited dealer network and unreliable supply chains, owners frequently resorted to junkyards or importing parts from Europe. For many, the Yugo wasn't just a car. It was a full-time hobby in automotive triage, with every drive feeling like a countdown to the next breakdown. The Yugo GV's suspension system wasn't so much a feature as it was an afterthought. Borrowed from the Fiat 127, a design already outdated by the time the Yugo debuted, the suspension was a crude combination of McPherson struts up front and a solid rear axle with coil springs. This setup provided minimal ride comfort and lacked the sophistication needed for smooth handling. Over time, the suspension components wore out prematurely, turning every pothole into an event that felt like the car was trying to shake itself apart. One common issue involved the bushings, which were made from subpar rubber that deteriorated quickly, leading to clunks and rattles over even minor bumps. The rear shocks were another weak point, often leaking or failing outright, leaving the car sagging unevenly. Owners frequently joked that the Yugo didn't just ride rough, it seemed actively offended by the idea of staying on the road. In corners, the Yugo's body roll was so pronounced it felt like the car was about to tip over, despite its compact size. High-speed stability was equally problematic, with the suspension struggling to maintain composure on uneven surfaces. For many drivers, the Yugo's suspension wasn't just a disappointment. It was a liability that made every trip feel like a mechanical gamble. The Yugo GV's manual transmission was a clunky, unrefined mess that added frustration to every drive. With poorly spaced gear ratios, drivers found themselves constantly shifting to keep the engine in its limited power band. The shifter itself felt vague and imprecise, as though the gears were hidden behind a fog of mechanical indifference. Misaligned linkages often made selecting the correct gear a challenge, leading to an alarming number of grind-filled shifts and occasional stalls. The transmission's reliability was equally questionable. Synchros were prone to early wear, resulting in gear engagement that felt more like a fight than a smooth operation. One memorable anecdote involves an owner whose transmission completely failed during a family road trip, forcing them to drive home stuck in second gear. Even when functioning properly, the transmission felt like it belonged in a vehicle from 2 decades earlier. Adding to the misery was the clutch. which was as fragile as the rest of the car. It wore out quickly, especially in stop-and-go traffic, leading to expensive repairs that few owners could avoid. For anyone hoping for a smooth, reliable drivetrain, the Yugo's transmission was a masterclass in dashed expectations. 14. Fragile clutch. The Yugo GV's clutch was a disaster waiting to happen. Designed with cost saving in mind, it used low-quality materials that couldn't withstand the rigors of everyday driving. Owners often reported clutch failure within the first 20,000 miles, with symptoms ranging from slipping and chattering to complete disengagement. The pressure plate and throw-out bearing were frequent culprits, failing well before their time and leaving drivers stranded. The fragility of the clutch was exacerbated by the car's weak engine and poorly tuned drivetrain. Drivers had to ride the clutch excessively just to get the car moving on inclines or through stop-and-go traffic, accelerating wear. Mechanics frequently complained about the difficulty of replacing the clutch, as the Yugo's cramped engine bay and shoddy assembly made even simple repairs an ordeal. Stories of multiple clutch replacements within a single year were so common, they became part of the Yugo's lore. For many owners, the clutch wasn't just a component, it was an ongoing expense that turned the car's low purchase price into a cruel joke. The Yugo GV didn't just have a fragile clutch, it had one that seemed actively designed to fail. 15. Limited dealer support. Buying a Yugo wasn't just a gamble on the car's quality, it was a gamble on whether you'd be able to maintain it at all. With a limited dealership network in the US, many owners found themselves driving long distances just to get basic repairs or parts. Even at authorized dealerships, the level of support was inconsistent, with poorly trained mechanics and frequent parts shortages turning simple fixes into prolonged headaches. One infamous story involves a Yugo owner in rural Ohio who had to wait 6 weeks for a replacement alternator to arrive, only to discover that the wrong part had been sent. Parts availability was a constant issue, as the supply chain from Yugoslavia was notoriously unreliable. Some dealerships resorted to cannibalizing other Yugos for parts, further underscoring the car's reputation as a logistical nightmare. For many owners, the lack of dealer support made the Yugo practically undrivable. The few available mechanics who were familiar with the car often charged a premium, knowing they were the only game in town. In the end, owning a Yugo wasn't just about enduring its flaws, it was about enduring the infrastructure failures that came with it. 16. Cheap plastic components. The Yugo GV's interior was a plastic paradise, and not in a good way. The dashboard, door panels, and trim pieces were all made from brittle, low-grade plastic that cracked, warped, and discolored with alarming speed. Even under normal use, these components often failed, with knobs breaking off in drivers' hands and vents falling apart after just a few adjustments. The steering wheel, molded from the same flimsy material, often developed cracks that left sharp edges, turning a basic function of driving into a potential safety hazard. Exposure to sunlight accelerated the deterioration of the interior plastics, with dashboards commonly splitting down the middle after a few summers. One owner humorously described their Yugo's interior as a kit of broken parts held together by hope and duct tape. Even functional components, like the glove box and center console, were prone to malfunction, with latches that refused to stay closed or hinges that snapped under light pressure. The problem wasn't just limited to aesthetics. These cheap materials made the car feel even less durable than it already was. For many owners, the interior wasn't just an annoyance, it was a daily reminder of the corners that had been cut to make the Yugo the cheapest car on the market. Instead of being a place of comfort, the Yugo's cabin was a minefield of crumbling plastic and unmet expectations. The Yugo GV's heating and air conditioning system was as unreliable as the rest of the car. The heater core, a critical component of the system, was prone to leaks, often leaving drivers with soggy carpets and the pungent smell of antifreeze. Even when the heater worked, It struggled to warm the cabin adequately during colder months, making the car feel more like a refrigerator than a refuge from winter. The air conditioning wasn't much better. When equipped, the system was underpowered and frequently broke down. The compressor, made from low-quality materials, often failed within a few years of use. Many owners reported that the AC barely blew cool air even on its best days, and leaks in the system made it expensive to maintain. One frustrated driver humorously quipped that rolling the windows down was more effective at cooling the car than the factory-installed air conditioning. Control knobs for both the heating and AC were prone to breaking off in drivers' hands, further compounding the frustration. In essence, the Yugo's climate control system wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an outright failure, leaving owners sweltering in summer and freezing in winter. The Yugo GV's steering was an adventure in unpredictability. The manual rack and pinion system was poorly designed and executed, leading to a disconnected, vague feeling on the road. At low speeds, the lack of power assistance made parking a workout, while at higher speeds, the steering had a tendency to wander, requiring constant corrections to keep the car in its lane. One common issue was the premature wear of tie rod ends and steering bushings, which caused clunks and rattles with every turn of the wheel. Alignment problems were another frequent complaint, with many Yugos coming from the factory already out of spec. Owners often described the steering as having a mind of its own, especially on uneven roads or during crosswinds, where the car felt like it was being actively pushed around by unseen forces. Stories abound of drivers gripping the wheel in terror as the car veered unpredictably at highway speeds. The Yugo's steering wasn't just imprecise, it was downright dangerous, turning every drive into a test of nerves and reflexes. 19. Vulnerable timing belt. The timing belt in the Yugo GV was one of its most notorious weak points. Made from low-grade rubber, it required replacement every 30,000 miles, a far shorter interval than most cars of the time. Failure to replace the belt on schedule often resulted in catastrophic engine damage, as the Yugo's engine was an interference design, meaning that a broken belt caused the pistons to collide with the valves. Many owners learned this lesson the hard way. Stories of timing belt failures at inopportune moments, on highways, during family vacations, or even at red lights, became so common they were practically expected. Mechanics frequently warned Yugo owners to carry a spare timing belt in the trunk, just in case. Replacing the belt wasn't cheap or easy either. With the Yugo's cramped engine bay and poorly aligned components, what should have been a routine job became an expensive ordeal. For many, the timing belt wasn't just a maintenance item, it was a ticking time bomb that defined the Yugo ownership experience. The Yugo GV's braking system was another weak link in its already tenuous mechanical chain. Equipped with front disc brakes and rear drums, the system was undersized and prone to fade under even moderate use. Owners frequently reported long stopping distances and a lack of confidence when braking at higher speeds, turning emergency stops into moments of pure panic. Brake pads and rotors wore out quickly, and replacement parts were often of such low quality that the problem persisted even after repairs. Worse, the braking system was prone to leaks in the master cylinder and brake lines, leading to sudden loss of pressure and dangerous situations on the road. One Yugo owner recalled narrowly avoiding an accident after the brake pedal went to the floor during a routine drive. Adding insult to injury, the brake system was notoriously difficult to bleed, often requiring multiple attempts to remove air from the lines. The Yugo's brakes weren't just unreliable, they were a constant reminder that stopping safely was never guaranteed. 21. Limited performance in cold weather. Cold weather exposed yet another Achilles heel of the Yugo GV, its complete inability to handle freezing temperatures. The carbureted engine was notoriously finicky in the cold, often refusing to start unless coaxed with copious amounts of starter fluid and a prayer. The weak battery compounded the problem, with many owners reporting that their cars wouldn't crank at all on particularly frosty mornings. The cooling system, already prone to failure, often froze up due to poorly designed hoses and a subpar thermostat. Radiator leaks were common in winter, as the cold caused brittle plastic components to crack. Owners frequently found themselves stranded, shivering in frustration as their Yugos sat lifeless in the driveway. For those brave enough to drive in the snow, the Yugo offered little reassurance. The lightweight body and narrow tires made traction a constant struggle, while the lack of insulation turned the cabin into an icebox. Cold weather performance wasn't just a weakness for the Yugo, it was a deal breaker for anyone living in a region with actual winters. 22. Uninspiring styling. The Yugo GV's design was as uninspiring as its performance. Based on the Fiat 127, the car had a boxy, outdated appearance that looked at least a decade older than it actually was. While competitors like the Honda Civic and Volkswagen Golf sported sleek, modern designs, the Yugo resembled a budget rental car from a low-budget European film. The uninspired styling extended to the interior, where a bland dashboard and cheap fabric seats created an aesthetic that screamed economy. The exterior offered little in the way of personalization, with limited paint colors and almost no optional features to make the car stand out. Even the wheel covers were dull, resembling tin pie plates more than functional automotive components. For many buyers, the Yugo's looks were a major turnoff. In an era where style was becoming increasingly important in the compact car market, the Yugo failed to deliver anything that could be remotely considered appealing. It wasn't just a bad car, it was a boring one. 23. Underwhelming warranty. The Yugo GV's warranty was as underwhelming as the car itself. While competitors offered comprehensive coverage plans that inspired confidence, the Yugo's limited warranty felt like a half-hearted promise from a company that knew its product wouldn't last. Owners were often left footing the bill for repairs that should have been covered, as many dealerships were reluctant to honor warranty claims due to the car's frequent issues. The warranty's terms were riddled with loopholes, excluding common problems like timing belt failure, brake issues, and electrical faults. One particularly infamous clause required owners to adhere to a strict maintenance schedule at authorized dealerships, something that was nearly impossible given the limited dealer network. For many buyers, the warranty wasn't a safety net. It was a thinly veiled attempt to pass the car's many problems back to the owner. Instead of peace of mind, the Yugo's warranty offered little more than a shrug and a vague promise that things might be okay, but probably wouldn't. 24. Terrible resale value. If the Yugo GV was a bad purchase new, it was an even worse investment on the used market. Within a year of ownership, the car's resale value plummeted to almost nothing, with many owners struggling to find buyers even at rock-bottom prices. Stories of Yugos being listed for $500 or less within months of purchase were common, highlighting just how quickly the car depreciated. Dealerships often refused to accept Yugos as trade-ins, citing the car's reputation for unreliability and high maintenance costs. Those who did accept them typically offered laughably low trade-in values, making it clear that the Yugo was more liability than asset. Private sales weren't much better. Prospective buyers were often deterred by the car's notorious reputation, leaving sellers stuck with vehicles they could barely give away. In the end, the Yugo GV wasn't just a bad car, it was a financial black hole. For many owners, the realization that their affordable car had become worthless was the final insult in a long list of disappointments. 25. Unstable on highways. Driving the Yugo GV on a highway was a test of nerves and reflexes. With a lightweight body and subpar aerodynamics, the car was easily buffeted by crosswinds, making it feel like it was constantly being pushed off course. The suspension, already underwhelming in city conditions, struggled even more at high speeds, leading to a floating sensation that left drivers gripping the wheel in fear. The underpowered engine compounded the problem. The Yugo struggled to maintain speeds above 60 mph, and attempts to pass slower vehicles required careful planning, a long stretch of open road, and a good dose of luck. The steering, prone to wandering, added another layer of anxiety, as small corrections often turned into overcorrections, creating a sense of instability that was hard to shake. One infamous review described highway driving in a Yugo as like piloting a shopping cart in a wind tunnel. Owners often avoided highways altogether, opting for slower backroads to spare themselves the stress. For those brave enough to venture onto the freeway, the experience wasn't just uncomfortable, it was terrifying. The Yugo GV was marketed as an affordable car, and it achieved that price point by offering almost nothing in terms of features. The base model didn't even include a radio, leaving drivers with the hum of the engine and the clatter of loose parts for entertainment. Power steering, power windows, and air conditioning were optional extras, but even when equipped, these features were poorly implemented and prone to failure. The seats lacked any form of adjustability beyond basic sliding tracks, and the steering column was fixed in place, meaning drivers often had to adapt to the car rather than the other way around. Storage was almost non-existent, with a glove box barely large enough to hold a pair of gloves and door pockets that felt like an afterthought. Even the dashboard instrumentation was sparse, offering only the bare minimum of gauges. For buyers hoping for a modern driving experience, the Yugo was a stark disappointment. The car's lack of features wasn't just noticeable, it was a glaring reminder of how much had been sacrificed to hit a low price point. Instead of feeling like a bargain, the Yugo felt incomplete. From the moment it hit US shores, the Yugo GV was mocked mercilessly by critics and consumers alike. It didn't take long for the car to earn its reputation as a rolling joke, with its frequent breakdowns and laughable build quality becoming the stuff of legend. Late-night comedians made it a staple of their monologues, and movies and TV shows used the Yugo as shorthand for failure. One of the most damaging blows came from an infamous Car and Driver review that described the Yugo as an embarrassment to Eastern Europe. Stories of Yugos breaking down on the way home from the dealership became so common that they seemed almost apocryphal. The car's reputation for unreliability overshadowed any potential merits, turning it into a symbol of cheapness rather than value. For owners, the Yugo's reputation was often more frustrating than the car itself. Explaining why they had purchased one often felt like defending a bad life choice. Ultimately, the Yugo's poor reputation wasn't just deserved, it was inescapable, ensuring its place as one of the most infamous cars of all time. 28. Low-quality paint. The Yugo GV's paint job was as short-lived as its mechanical reliability. The factory-applied paint was thin and poorly adhered, leading to rapid fading, chipping, and peeling. In sunny climates, the car's color would often degrade within months, leaving it looking more like a relic from the 1970s than a brand new vehicle from the 1980s. Rust only worsened the problem. As the car's untreated steel panels began to corrode, the paint would bubble and flake off, exposing even more metal to the elements. Attempts to repaint the car were often futile, as the underlying surface was so poorly prepared that new paint wouldn't adhere properly. For many owners, the cosmetic degradation was the final insult. A car that already drove poorly and broke down frequently also looked terrible, making it a source of embarrassment wherever it went. The Yugo's paint wasn't just low quality, it was emblematic of the car's overall disregard for longevity and aesthetics. 29. Lack of refinement. Refinement wasn't just missing from the Yugo GV, it seemed to have been actively avoided. The car's rough ride, noisy cabin, and rattling components created an experience that felt more like riding in a utility cart than a passenger vehicle. Vibrations from the engine were transmitted directly into the cabin, shaking everything from the steering wheel to the loose change in the glove box. The lack of refinement extended to the car's fit and finish. Panel gaps were inconsistent, doors didn't close properly, and trim pieces often fell off without warning. Even basic controls, like the turn signal stalk and gearshift, felt flimsy and awkward to use. One reviewer likened driving the Yugo to operating a machine that hadn't yet decided if it was finished being built. Owners quickly realized that no amount of maintenance or care could improve the Yugo's inherent roughness. It was a car that didn't just feel cheap, it felt unfinished, as though it had been rushed into production without any thought for the driver's experience. The Yugo GV's place in pop culture was sealed almost as soon as it hit the market. While other cars could boast of being icons of design or engineering, the Yugo became an icon of failure. Its low price, constant breakdowns, and comically bad build quality made it a favorite target for comedians, writers, and filmmakers. Movies like Die Hard with a Vengeance used the Yugo as the ultimate disposable car, while late-night shows turned it into a punchline about poor decision-making. Even decades after its demise, the Yugo remains a cultural shorthand for cheapness and unreliability. The joke wasn't just that the car was bad, it was that anyone thought it could succeed. For many, the Yugo's infamy is its only redeeming quality. It has become a collector's item for those who appreciate its ironic charm, a reminder of what happens when ambition outpaces execution. The Yugo wasn't just a bad car, it was a bad car that everyone loved to hate. Conclusion: the Yugo's legacy of infamy. The Yugo GV wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of what happens when cutting corners meets poor execution. From its unreliable mechanics to its laughable build quality, the Yugo turned basic transportation into a daily exercise in frustration. Despite its low price, it failed to deliver even the bare minimum of reliability or comfort, leaving owners with little more than regret. Yet, in its own way, the Yugo has achieved an enduring legacy. It's a cautionary tale, a cultural punchline, and a collector's curiosity all rolled into one. For better or worse, the Yugo GV will forever be remembered as one of the worst cars in automotive history, a true icon of failure.